What is up, everybody? This is Mike with Tiny Life Big Mission, and on this segment of the channel we are doing a vlog for our journey on the PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail. For those of you who aren't aware, Caitlin and I have been hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, which is a 2,650 mile trail that spans from Mexico all the way up through California, Oregon, and Washington to Canada. That's where we're going. So it finishes in Canada, and we've started on March 3rd of 2024. We are now doing our fourth update for how week 4 went for us. This is also for the purpose of those who may be hiking the PCT, who are trying to get an idea of what to expect when they get on trail. We've been sharing some of the things that we've experienced along the way, and I don't know, I hope it's valuable for you, whether you're friend, family, or follower. So week 4 was quite a week. We just gotten done in week 3. We had a week off because we needed to resupply some gear because we've been experiencing a lot more wet than what we had anticipated. We did bring some wind gear or rain gear, but not tons. And the stuff that we had worked, but it just wasn't enough to handle the volume of rain that we were getting. We just didn't expect that much. So we got our gear, and we also had to formulate a new plan. Like, what were we going to do? Because where we had left off, where we had got off of the trail, was at about mile marker 151.5 or something like that. It was right at the Paradise Valley Cafe. And to come back to that spot, we would be hiking up the mountain into Idlewild, getting to about 8,000, 8,500, somewhere in there, feet quickly, and then going up to over 9,000 feet in the next phase past that. And all that area was covered with snow. The reports that we were getting from different resources were saying that it was impassable for people who didn't have mountaineering experience, gear, and training. So not to venture up there if you didn't have it. Yeah. We don't have it, so we weren't interested in trying to explore that. So we had really a couple options: to stay off the trail and wait for it to get better, jump ahead, or continue through. And we didn't really want to wait. We didn't really want to push through, so we found a way to jump ahead. After a bunch of strategizing, we decided that the best place for us to move up the trail to would be mile marker 566, which is Tehachapi Pass. That's on Highway 58, exit 159, and hike south. We'd be working our way through all the wind farms, the aqueduct, the Mojave Desert, so some of the lower elevation parts of the trail in Southern California, and some of the more notorious hot ones that are miserable to do in the summer. And we thought that there's no chance that there would be bad weather there. And yeah, so it was pretty low elevation. I think the highest point that we reached was about 6,300 feet. And so for the highest point, that was pretty low, considering what the PCT elevation that it has. So yeah, at any rate, we jump in. Day 1, we'll start there. Day 1 of the week was technically Sunday. We went to church with Jeff and Barbara one last time, had kind of a last dinner, a supper together. We made dinner for them to thank them for all that they had done for us. And it was a good night. Nothing much on day 1. Yeah. Day 2, we went to work with Jeff that morning. He dropped us off at Tehachapi Pass and took some pictures of us as we waved goodbye and started down the road to the trail. And that day was pretty significant. We ended up hiking 8.84 miles, and it showed on our trail trackers that we only gained 1,381 elevation, but it felt like way more than that. We had a lot of weather. It wasn't rain as much this time, but the wind. So coming over, like, we were coming up over this mountain straight from the highway. You basically go into a mountain, and we were hiking up that thing, and it was all a headwind. There was just wind coming over that mountain, and it just sucked the life out of you. We thought we were going to be able to get a lot further that day, But we did get a late start. We started at like 12:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And I don't know, what are the highs and lows for you that day?
One of the highs was being able to nap in the car on the way there. That was a hard day. Like climbing straight out the gate was pretty tough, and the wind was really tough, and I really wanted to enjoy the hike a lot more than I did because it was beautiful. It was our first experience with the windmills, which I know people say that you'll get really sick of them, but it's still kind of cool to see.
It's a novelty thing.
Yeah. It was just so windy and so cold, and quite frankly, my feet really hurt.
Still,
and it wasn't anything to do with blisters or inflammation. We can go into that later. But my feet were hurting. I was not feeling up to making it very far that day.
That day we basically stopped early because we'd gotten a late start, and there was also these gnarly clouds that were blowing in, and we thought we were going to get hit with some kind of weather event again.
Yeah, we don't trust the weather apps at this point. We're just like,
they're always wrong, and we've just been getting hit left and right. So I saw this weather thing rolling in. I was like, we need to just buckle down for the night and set up our tent in storm mode and be ready for it. And so we found a place that was not super sheltered, but it was more sheltered than what we had seen up to that point.
Yeah, and it was at a creek, and it had a picnic table.
Yeah.
So at least we had a couple elements of comfort if we're going to stay there.
Day 2, we ended up doing a lot more that day. We set out early that day, and we hiked 17.12 miles. That's the farthest distance we had covered since starting the PCT on March 3rd. And we did 34.22 in elevation gain. Also our biggest elevation gain day for the trail. And essentially what we did that day is we left that little creek, which was at around 3,600 feet above sea level, I think, and hiked up over this monster mountain. It was 6,300. It was the highest point of this section. And I came back down into this little valley and then hiked up another little mountain and started to come back down that other side. And that's where we found our camp. That was Tyler Horse Washout Campground. It wasn't really a campground per se, but there was a couple of I think there was 5 tent sites next to this creek. And the creek was flowing, so for those of you who may be northbound getting a trail update, at the time that we were there was the 26th, and it was flowing really good. Little silty, but plenty of water. Highs and lows for day 3.
I don't really remember that day very much, other than we did encounter some cows who were wisely hiding behind the juniper bushes to get out of the wind. And I think it was 2 mamas and 2 babies.
Yeah.
But seeing animals on the trail always makes me happy, even if they're just cows. So always a highlight.
They were cute cows too.
Yeah.
They had fun personalities. They were playing ring around the bush with us because they were kind of spooked by us, but
didn't want to get out of the
wind.
Shelter of from the wind.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just wasn't feeling great, but going uphill seems to be a lot easier for me. So the incline seemed to be okay. I was still pretty tired, but
it seemed to help your feet going up most all the day.
Yeah.
The coming down part was hard, but
yeah,
we saw a lot of different terrain change in that day too, coming over those 2 different mountains. We went through 2 big, huge wind farms where there's hundreds of windmills as far as you can see. And then we also went through a forest fire burnout area that happened a couple years prior.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just really interesting vegetation, and there was also a little section that had some forest in it too. So just kind of a weird mix of desert and barren hills and lots of wind. I think that day our wind averaged at probably a 45 mile an hour sustained, and then every once in a while, as you're leaning into this headwind, you're putting your weight into it, and a 70 mile an hour gust, where if you normally got hit with the 70 mile an hour gust, it would probably knock you on your keister. But where you're leaning into the 45 mile an hour wind, it does still knock you back a good ways. And there was a couple of times where I had lost my balance and almost fell from a gust, but we got hit with some pretty strong wind. I think probably the strongest wind I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was pretty insane. Anyway.
It's funny because I've heard people say, like, you'll get really sick of seeing all of the windmills. And in my mind, I was just like, oh yeah, boring scenery. And I didn't really think about, well, they put the windmills there for a reason. Like, there's wind there. And it does feel very nonstop. And so I was like, oh, maybe that's why people are more sick of the windmills than just seeing them. It's the fact that there's so much wind. We do not like wind. Wind is hard to hike in. It doesn't make it super enjoyable.
I should think we should clarify that. We don't like 45-mile-an-hour wind to hike.
Yeah.
A little breeze, we hike in 25-mile-an-hour wind somewhat regularly in Idaho, and
that's fair.
It's not that big of a deal. Like this wind, you just couldn't get out of it. There was no break. It was just constant all the time for days.
Yeah. I will say also, however, that going south from Tehachapi, I think was way more beautiful than had we been going north through this direction, because if you're going north, you really are seeing like all of the windmills, all of the windmills coming up. And as you're hiking south, you're kind of hiking towards the mountains. And so you got to see that. There's a little bit of snow cover, which is, really not our favorite, but it still looks nice.
Yeah.
So I did enjoy that aspect of flip-flopping for those of you who are like worried about it
or considering options. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a bad way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I enjoyed we talked about it a lot. I totally agree. Like the southbound route for this portion was definitely better. Day 4, we ended up hiking 13.8 miles and had a whopping elevation gain of 574 feet.
Woo!
Now, a lot of that elevation gain was we were on a big down come out of this mountain stint of the trail, but as you're going down, there's still little parts where you kind of whoop up and come over little hills and stuff. So even though our whole day was down and then flat, there was still a little bit of elevation gain just because of those little hills or whatever. But it was a pretty interesting walk down the mountain because you kind of left all the windmills and stuff behind and transitioned into the southwest corridor of the Mojave Desert and crossing where the LA aqueduct comes down from Northern California into the main distribution portion of the aqueduct. And it's very flat. So highs and lows for you.
It was just hard to get going, and then downhill the rest of the day was tough on me.
But like we did pretty good that day though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it was okay. And the flat was okay. Like we actually started the aqueduct, right?
Yep.
And it was warm, but not too bad. And of course, if you're walking on the cement part, it like reflects all the heat back at you. So we stayed on the dirt road after walking on it for a couple of steps, really. It wasn't that far. And it was just it was a beautiful day. Sky was blue, sun was out, it was warm. It was probably the nicest like weather we've had for hiking.
Since we started, by far.
Yeah. And the trail was obviously super easy. It was definitely like road walking, which is a little dull, but I don't know. I was grateful for it.
Yeah, me too. We were on, I think it was like March 27th was the day that we started the aqueduct. And for those of you who don't know, the aqueduct is a portion of section E that is like 22 miles of flat, no water with intense heat. Like I said, you're crossing the Mojave Desert. So in the summertime, the temperatures can range anywhere between easy 100 plus up to like maybe 115, 120, somewhere in there. And when you don't have any water for 20 miles at those temperatures, that's a dangerous thing. And it's something that hikers have resorted to doing that section at night and various other things to escape the heat. Part of the beauty of our plan in jumping ahead and doing that section was that we won't have to experience that level of heat and we'll get it done. That being said, on the 27th of March, it was still very warm. I think the temperature that day was only 64 on the thermostat, or on the thermometer, but in real life, it felt like it was 85.
Yeah.
Like we were hot. It was warm.
Definitely.
So something to just be aware of. We ended up making camp that night by just finding a little patch off to the left of the aqueduct in like some, like there's a bunch of barbed wire fences of protected land in that area. So you can't really, there's just not a lot of space to camp. But we ended up finding a little place, and we actually got a really beautiful sunset, a gorgeous sunrise.
Probably the high for that day. I forgot about the sunset.
Yeah,
and we were like, the area that we camped in was like surrounded by little yellow flowers. So you had the yellow flowers and the beautiful, colorful sunset, and
yeah,
that was a nice spot for sure.
Yeah,
and we did actually hear someone like walk by at night. I'm not sure who.
Yeah, or what time, but we had somebody hiking at night that time.
Mm-hmm.
And there are cars that drive on the aqueduct, so don't camp on the aqueduct. It's an actual road. But yeah, the thing that I think it surprised me the most about the aqueduct is I was expecting this big tube above ground that's holding all this water. And because some of the pictures that I've seen of the aqueduct are exposed where the whole thing is above ground.
And we saw it when we drove up through California last summer.
Yeah, when we were doing a road trip.
And so we're like, oh, that's the aqueduct. That's what we're going to be walking on. And it
wasn't like that.
It's not that one.
Yeah,
it's still part of it.
It's still part of it, yeah, but it's very different. The aqueduct is buried under the ground, most of the section of the aqueduct. So it's just a big cement slab that is essentially a road, and the aqueduct is underneath that. Now, there's a point where you get to where the aqueduct is exposed, but it's maybe a 4-mile section, and it's not fully exposed except for one little like 30-foot section. Other than that, you can just see the little like top quarter of it. Day 5, we did hike 11 miles. There was only 236-foot elevation gain that day, so even less, but that was the rest of the aqueduct. We finished up the aqueduct that day, and we camped at Hikertown.
Mm-hmm.
Highs and lows for that day.
I think the low really was just being a little bit disappointed with Hikertown. We had high hopes for showers and that kind of thing. And
for those of you who don't know, Hikertown is an iconic stop on the PCT. It's known for its weirdness. It's kind of like the Portland of the PCT. And essentially this lady who owns the property has gotten like some weird props and made like this little...
It's kind of like a western-y
theme
setup. Yeah,
yeah, it's like a movie set kind of western-y thing. And it's basically a bunch of cargo containers that have been chopped up into like halves and thirds and weird storefronts put on them. And then there's just a bed in there. And it's kind of like a hostel where you can camp out there for the night if you're heading northbound. It's the last water source to get water before heading into the 20-mile stretch of desert. So it's definitely something where everybody stops to get water. And it's just known. It's just a weird thing, and there's a mixed bag of reviews on it where some people rave about how cool their experience was, and then there's some people that are like, this thing is just kind of weird. And our experience, the owner, her name is Marta. She was super sweet, like super awesome. Nice human. And she's just, the place that she's got is just really, and I hate to say this because she was such a sweetheart, but it's a dump. It's not well kept. Like the bathrooms were disgusting. I think I would have rather used a pit toilet. And there was only one toilet there for everybody to share. All the tiny houses and any campers share one bathroom. The shower that we had heard promise of was behind the row of tiny houses, in between the row of tiny houses and this row of RVs and campers. And there's people who like help her with the property managing stuff or something. I don't know what the arrangement is that they've got, but there's people living back there. And back there is where the shower is, and it's just an open shower. Like they've got like a hallway kind of boarded off, but there's no door, there's no shower curtain, there's nothing from stopping people from seeing you, and it's all outside, and it was weird and creepy and
it's way too cold to do an outside shower. Like later on in the season, it'll probably be
not a big deal, yeah.
So maybe if there's a bunch of people there, it might be a better experience for you, might be a lot more fun. There is like a little covered area where you can charge stuff and chairs, so that was nice.
But even the chairs, like one of the pillows had fallen off and was sitting on the ground, and when you went to pick it up, it was covered in maggots on the backside because it had been sitting on the ground for so long.
I mean, we were early season, so Some of the stuff I feel like I can excuse, but it just wasn't quite what we had hoped. But we did get a free ride to the market down the road.
Yeah, there's a market that's 4 miles up the road that has a phone number at the hiker town that if you call them, they'll shuttle you back and forth for free. You just have to buy stuff at their place. It is stupid expensive. I think probably the most expensive trail place. We supplied a day and a half and spent $100 for a day and a half.
But they did have a lot of interesting options of things.
They were rich with inventory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They had a lot of different things. And was it Polynesian? They had like food that they would make there as
hot
well,
food,
like burgers and that kind of thing. But was it like Polynesian breakfast?
It had several like they had some stuff that was definitely like Pacific Islander stuff.
Yeah.
And they had some stuff that was more like Filipino. And then they even had like some American and some Mexican stuff too. It was kind of a weird mix. But the food was good. The lady who prepared our food was not super nice, but she was a good cook. Like she made good food.
She did a good job. And they had a couple little dogs hanging out in the pavilion that I hung out with and I was happy about.
Yeah, Caitlin had a good time with the little poochies. But yeah, overall, I mean, we ended up not staying in one of the hostels. She wanted $40 for us to stay in the hostels, which on her sign it said $30, but
I think it's just because it was two of us, like as a couple, she probably charged
a little
more.
extra. I didn't quite understand her English and trying to explain that, but we ended up just deciding to stay in our tent, which was $10. And I just want to warn everybody who decides to stay in your tent at Hikertown. Hikertown is located right on 138, which is a major highway that goes through the middle of Southern California from west to east. And there were so many cars driving on that highway, and we were camped literally like maybe, we were back in her property about 20 feet, but that's 20 feet from the highway. Like it's right on the highway, and there's rumble strips all over that thing. And I don't think there was a driver who didn't hit a rumble strip that night. So you're not just getting the excess of the highway noise, but also the rumble strips as well. And I didn't sleep hardly at all that night.
I think it was mostly like big trucks too that were going through at night, which makes sense.
Yeah,
also makes sense why they were so loud going across the rumble strips.
Yeah.
You got an 18-wheeler as opposed to an SUV. It's a little more alarming.
And it was still very windy that night too.
Yeah.
And the next day, but
it was, wind is hard.
Yeah, the wind was rough.
We did hear a long-eared owl, which I had never heard of, and we didn't see them, but they're out there, so that was kind of fun.
Yeah. Day 6, we knew that this weekend had, the end of this week 4, had a storm warning for it. There was supposed to be a storm coming in that was going to hit late Friday night and go all day Saturday into the wee hours of Sunday morning, and then it was supposed to be done. And from everything that we had done research-wise on the weather report, it said that we were supposed to get a ton of rain. Like it was going to be a lot of rain. There was warnings for flash floods and stuff like that. And with severe winds up to 45 mile an hour sustained, 65 mile an hour wind gusts or something like that. So when we left Hikertown on day 6, we knew that we needed to get to a camp where we were going to be able to set up and prepare for a storm that should be hitting somewhere between 11 o'clock and midnight Friday night. So we set off from Hikertown. Coming out of Hikertown southbound, you're going again straight up into the mountains, so you have a big climb. We ended up hiking 9.5 miles that day, and in those 9 miles we climbed 2,631 feet in elevation gain and camped at the campground called Horse Camp. Horse Trail Camp. Horse Trail Camp is the name of it. We got into camp, like we actually originally had planned to hike, I think about 15 miles that day. But on our walk up the trail, we ran into a couple of ladies and another gentleman who all 4 of them warned us about the storm. But the ladies told us that they had changed the forecast and they were now predicting snow starting at elevations over 5,000 feet. And the camp that we had planned to get to at mile 15 would have put us at around 5,200 150 feet or something like that. So they advised to stay at Horse Trail Camp, which was 5 miles closer, and it was under 5,000 feet. It was at 4,850, so 150 feet below 5,000 feet. So we made the decision to stay there instead of going up because we didn't want to have to mess with potential snow. It was also shorter mileage, which was good for Caitlin because she was, again, tuckered. Yeah, so we got to camp at about 3:30-ish and got everything set up. We knew there was a storm coming in, so we really, set up the tent to be able to handle the storm as best as we could with what we had.
Yeah.
And got in the tent at around 4:30-ish, I think.
Yeah.
I think me and Caitlin made a bet of when we thought the storm would actually start, because we predicted that it was going to start early. And Caitlin said around 8 o'clock, and I said at 6 o'clock, and it started raining, I think, around 5.
Yeah, so we're both wrong, unfortunately.
Yeah, came earlier than even both of us thought. And we had snow by like 6:30, and it snowed all night long into the next day, and we'll get to that in just a second. But that night, when we first encountered the storm, we got dumped so much snow on us. We ended up, I think it only accumulated at about 4 inches, but it dropped. It was continually changing between rain, sleet, hail, snow, and it was a blizzard-like condition where the wind was blowing so much that you couldn't really see anything. And the reason I know this is because I had to get out of the tent multiple times because of the tent collapse due to the snow multiple times. I think it was 3 times that night.
Yeah.
So everything collapses on you, and on the inside of this tent, it's not built for winter. It's not a winter tent, it's a summer tent. And because of that, there's no liner or fly for the top. So when it's cold outside the tent and warm inside the tent, or warmer inside the tent, it creates condensation all over the inside of the tent. And if you touch it, it just soaks you. You're instantly wet. Your fabric will absorb it. And so you're doing this dance when the tent collapses to try and not get as much condensation on you as possible, because if it's freezing, and that's dangerous, it puts you in a hypothermic situation. But you got this whole condensated tent collapsing on you, and you're trying in the middle of the night as you're waking up to get everything pushed up off of you. There's snow on the outside of the tent pushing down on you, so you're trying to shake that off. Meanwhile, I'm having to get all of my rain gear on to go out and try and reset the tent up. And you go out into this blizzard, you get soaking wet because of it's just blowing every direction. And then you got to come back into the tent that was kind of dry, or at least drier than the outside. And it's like a 3x6 space that a 6-foot dude is climbing into that's soaking wet. Like, you just get everything wet. It sucks. Yeah. And so you try and get it set up to where it's off of you, get back in bed, go back to sleep, only to have it collapse on you again, to have to get up and get out and go and do it again 3 times. So by the next morning, I was pretty exhausted. I didn't sleep a ton. I hadn't slept a ton from the night before that either because of the highway. And we now had like 4 inches of snow on the ground. The trail that we had in front of us, we needed to get up over, I think the highest point on the trail was about 5,800 feet to get over the peak that was in front of us. And according to the weather reports that we had gotten that night, they had gotten up to about 18 inches of snow. So we were going to have to push through that or wait out the snow to melt. And that was just coming into Saturday, day 7 of the week. So before we jump into that day, I'll just say highs and lows. I mean, I know obviously the low was the storm that came in that night that just wrecked our camp multiple times. What was a high for you that day?
That day we actually got to see tons of wildflowers, and that was something that I've been hoping for and looking forward to about hiking this time of year. So we got to see tons of different yellow flowers like we had seen on the aqueduct, and as we were going more into the mountains we were getting more purples, and the blues were really cool. And then we started seeing the California poppies, which are always super fun to see. How
bright orange.
Yeah, the bright orange, and how they're like folded together and they open up with the sun. And that totally made my hike. It was a pretty nice day.
Yeah, I think we counted 6 different varieties of yellow wildflower, the poppies, 3 different purple ones, 2 different blue ones.
I think there was a little bit of Indian paintbrush,
Indian
which
paintbrush
is the
in there.
red.
Yeah.
But there wasn't much of that color.
Mm-mm.
And honestly, like the low for me for this day was just how badly my feet were hurting. I thought I would do a little bit better. Someone who's a new follower commented on our week 2 update, noticing the way that I walked. And it's funny because I had seen a couple of the videos that Michael had taken of me hiking, and I noticed I was walking funny. It's like, oh, that's really weird. My knees are like clicked in. And it got me thinking. I was like, oh, that means that it's probably forcing my feet to overpronate, and I'm probably getting plantar fasciitis, which I've experienced before, but only in my heels. And I just didn't even think that that could possibly be the pain that I'm experiencing on the bottom of my feet.
Because it was more in your arches than
my
anything
arches.
else.
And but this person who commented recognized it from, I'm sorry, I don't totally know, I'm assuming your work, said something about it being valgus osteoarthritis, which sounds a little more serious than what I think it is, but they had mentioned a lateral corrector or stabilizer, I might be getting that wrong, but basically forces your knee to stay out instead of collapsing in. And so in my mind, what I was trying to do is like, okay, I got to keep my knees apart. And that was meaning that my hips had to work extra hard. And so I was feeling sore in my hips trying to keep my knees apart as I'm climbing, which did help my arches not be as sore. I also had leukotape, and I ended up taping my arches to try and help, and that seemed to help a little bit.
Leads us into the last day, Saturday. It stormed all night. Like I said, the tent fell in 3 times, had to fix that. All day Saturday, we weren't really able to get out of the tent because it stormed all day long. I think we had one little like 5-10 minute break where we got out, kind of did some stretches because we were hunched over in that tent all the night before, all that morning. Got to go to the bathroom real quick, and then before we even got done going to the bathroom, it started raining, and Caitlin ended up getting rained on pretty good, getting back into the tent, because it came on so fast.
Yeah.
Stayed the rest of the afternoon in the tent. And so we were basically trying to decide how long it was going to take us to wait this thing out. And we know that we've got an event that we've got to get off the trail for at the end of April, beginning of May. My son is graduating from Boise State University. Congratulations, buddy. I'm so proud of you. And so we had this event that we needed to get off in about 4 weeks. And we were kind of doing some math. And from the different reports of different hikers that we have received who are headed northbound, had told us that basically Pass Acton southbound was going to be pretty much impassable. There's so much snow coming out of the mountains that the next place that you resupply outside of Acton is a ski resort, ski lodge. So you're up in elevation, up in the mountains, and there's tons of snow. And basically from there you go through all the mountain ranges back down to the Paradise Valley Cafe where we skipped ahead to do. So from where we were camping that night where we got the snow, we were about 6 days from Acton. We just kind of made the decision that rather than wait for the snow for maybe 4 days to where we can go another 6 days to have to get off and not really have anywhere else that we can hike because everywhere else is so covered up in snow. And honestly, like these mountains were a portion of the PCT that we were really looking forward to, being able to do Big Bear and Idlewild and San Bernardino and all these beautiful mountain ranges. We wanted to see them and enjoy them, and it just hasn't been that way. So we decided that we were going to get off the trail. Where we were camped, we had actually crossed a road about 3 miles prior, and so we were just going to go back down the mountain. We had called Jeff, and he was more than willing to come and pick us up at that spot and bring us back to his house. And so we're just going to take the next couple weeks off waiting for the weather because we really want to enjoy this section. This is a very beautiful part of the PCT. There is a certain, I don't know, majesty, I guess, for lack of a better word, to these desert mountain ranges. They have a different biosphere and a different kind of life than what we've experienced, and it's been quite enjoyable, even though it's been miserable. So we want it to be totally, or at least, I mean, outdoor hiking, you got to be expecting to get wet. We're not afraid of getting wet. We're not afraid of weather. This has just been severe. Like literally, we were sitting there in that tent and we plotted it out. Every weekend since we have started, without fail, all the weekends, I think we added up 5 different weekends because we started on a Sunday, and then it would have been 5 Sundays since then. Every one of the Sundays, there was snow on the PCT in Southern California. So there's been 5 weeks of massive weather events that we just weren't prepared for. We're not prepared for snow stuff. We have snow gear. We just left it all back at home, ready to be shipped to destinations up the trail that we know we're going to face snow in. And so since we don't have the gear, it's not worth risking our life for. It's not worth the risk of injury either. So we're just going to get off the trail, go back home, do some training and maybe a couple little minor gear swaps, and prepare to get back onto the trail after my son's graduation in May.
Yeah.
We'll start back at the PVC, Paradise Valley Cafe, working northbound again until we get to essentially Hiker Town. Then we'll jump north up to Tehachapi and continue our hike northbound. So
At least that's the plan.
that's the plan right now. Yeah, it's been kind of a crazy start. If you haven't started yet, I would definitely consider bringing some snow gear for the first couple 100 miles, because if you are starting in the first part of April, chances are you're going to face snow in Laguna. You're going to face some snow in San Jacinto for sure, or San Jacinto, however you say it the right way. I'm sorry, I butcher my Spanish sometimes. And as you go up into Idlewild for sure, like there's snow in all those areas, and though you'll hit that within your first couple weeks. And at the rate of melt right now, it's going to take probably around 16 days for what they've got right now to melt down, or what they've gotten on the last couple weekends to melt down on top of what was already up there. So if you're starting today, you don't have enough time before you're going to get here for the snow to melt. Just consider all that as you're making your plans. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for your prayers. It's probably the best way that you can support us. So we'll be off of the vlog for a couple weeks, but coming back to you in the first part of May. All right. Thanks, guys. God bless.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.